Hello, folks. I'm going to do like a talk. I'm going to talk about basically gear today and equipment. And this was a suggestion given to me that I think was a good one. So we'll see what happens. And maybe this is targeted more towards, younger players, which is funny because I don't think anyone under 35 watches anything on this channel. So that's some good, YouTube algorithm chasing from me. Comment in the comments. What's your age if you're under 35? Are you watching this video? Anyway, so I've taken a couple of notes here. Yeah. So like heads, right? Drum heads. Because like now, there is so much product in the world. And back in the day, the 60s, the 50s, the 60s, even the 70s in Australia. Australia was pretty late to getting a lot of stuff. So I'm pretty sure in the early days it was really Remo drum heads was about all you had. And then later on we've had all these other brands, of course, and they're all great. And you kind of go, wow, why is there so many? I've always been a Remo guy, and the reason is this. I think all of the other manufacturers make excellent stuff. But let's say hypothetically all of the drum heads sounded the same. And so I had to choose them based on another reason. The thing about Remo heads for me is the feel. They just feel the best to me. And if you wonder what that means, well, a drum head can have a kind of rigidity to it. It's the same as a drum stick. It can be stiff and kind of papery. There's a few heads out there that I find just have that stiff papery kind of feel. And then you can get other heads where to me they feel a bit too loose and too buttery. And they're too much the opposite. Whereas Remo seems to be perfectly, for me, just that nice feel, and that's why I use them. And then, of course, you've got like ambassador heads and all of these names and things. Well, these are just classifications for thicknesses and number of plies and the type of finish that might be on the head. So is it clear or is it coated? Is it a double ply? Is it a single ply? And so, of course, like the ambassadors are kind of the do-all head. But then, of course, if you're playing a lot of heavy music where you're hitting hard, well, there's two things. You're going to wear out heads faster with a single ply head, but also the quality that a single ply head brings is kind of about more on the side of resonance and tone, and you're getting it to sing a bit more, which in the context of, say, a hard rock is probably not what you're after anyway. So a double ply head is going to be more durable, but it's also going to, of course, be a bit of a slightly deader sound. It's not going to sing as much. And especially once you start tuning them down to where they're pretty loose. There's another thinner one, which is a diplomat, which is below the ambassador, which is another single ply. And I had those on my bop kit, and that would be my preference on that little bop kit with a 16-inch bass drum, 10 and a 14. Because that's sort of like the ultimate sensitivity and the opposite to the thick double ply. Whereas if I want to play a thick double ply drum that's tuned medium or loose really delicately, you're not really going to hear anything. It all dies. Whereas with a diplomat that's thin and sings, you can get all that detail and you can play it at a nice quiet volume and still pull it all out of the drum. And Remo made a vintage, I forget the name of it now, but it was kind of like a plastic version of an old calf skin, I guess, or something like that. Renaissance, they might be called Renaissance. And just really great heads, yeah. But of course that's on like a bebop kit that at that time was really kind of just doing that. That was its job. I'll have a little look at my notes because I might go off on a tangent, which is what we do here. What else did we say? We're talking about this. Oh yeah, of course, right? So then there's so we kind of know this stuff. All the manufacturers make their claims about their gluing system and their rings are pressed this way and their blah 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 and all of that stuff. People say that they don't like Remo and they prefer others and they find those easier to tune and all of this stuff, but it's up to you. But they certainly make a big difference. And then, of course, if you want to get really into the nuance of it, because I guess that's what we're doing, well, then you can be talking about heads pairing with certain drums, because obviously different drums have different qualities. These maple drums here, which are kind of like a thin, good quality maple shell, well, they're very kind of live. And they sing and they're quite sensitive. That 18-inch, 16-inch floor tom over there, yeah, that's a birch and a maple hybrid. But birch tends to be a bit louder. Which is why it's a common choice for rock, because it has that boof, it has that punch, and it's louder. But it can lack a bit of the song of, say, the maple. The maple's a bit warmer and has a warmer sort of song. So if you take those things into account, then the drum heads can make a big difference depending on how you pair them. So if you had, say, a thin shell, a thin maple shell that was really ringy and wanted to sing, you could go one direction, which would be to try to complement that as much as possible and make it ring and sing even more. So you would go the thin way and you would go diplomats and try and pull all of that tone and everything out. If in this case, like with the maple kit, that wasn't working for you and you wanted to tone it down a bit, then you could put a double ply emperor head on it to sort of deaden it a little bit. Like I said, I've always used ambassadors coated because they're just the sort of like the do everything head. But there's a ebony, the black Remo heads. They're called ebony. Had 2 or 3 sets of them, and I've also had a set of the velvet ones they used to make, which is sort of like a frosted kind of finish, smooth frosted. But those clear ebonies are like a double ply clear head, but they're black. And so on this kit, it's kind of like the clear head complements the singiness of the kit, and those heads work really well with this drum kit. I'm just going to waffle on, whatever. Those heads work really well with that drum kit. So, lost my train of thought, so I'll just look down here. And then it's, so those could be things that I could do before I wanted to muffle, right? And just to finish off what I forgot I was going to say is the Emperor's coated on there, on the maple kit for me. They just don't quite do it. It's a bit too... The coated head is going to be a bit drier and sharper. It doesn't have a... You kind of can tell by the look of it. Whereas a double ply clear head on that maple kit, for some reason, seems to balance out. And then, of course, it comes down to preference. But they're all made for a reason, and they do something. Then there's all this muffling thing, right? And muffling's been around for ages. Like so many, all the great records from 60s and 70s and all that stuff, that was the sound. And then you had kind of, I guess, like Steve Gadd in the late 70s, I suppose. Maybe the mid-70s, or certainly by the 80s. That was kind of the sound, that dead, clear heads, everything dead. And that sound really came out of recording studios. It's because it suits engineers, and it just sounds better through it. Well, it's easier to work with through a microphone because drums push a lot of air around, and there's a lot of overtones and noise. You know, you hit a drum, boom, all this stuff happening. So of course I can interfere. It creates noise on a microphone. So if you can deaden it, dunk, the noise goes away. It's a short sound, which then gives the engineer a lot more flexibility in terms of what they can do with that sound, because there isn't interference coming from elsewhere. And that's really where that came from. There's plenty of drummers that it just becomes a thing. It becomes the sound, and once that happens and it becomes popularized, it can become something that people expect. It's different for drummers, say, that have a profile than drummers that are working general business drummers. You know, you can't just turn up and say, hey man, this is me and this is my sound, and, you know, like it or not. As a working drummer, you're going to have to make all these adjustments, and you're probably going to be playing different drum kits all the time and all of that kind of stuff. Even stuff like... See, all this is really about is nuance. All these products exist for a reason, and they do a certain thing. Let me get back on track here. Get back on track. Oh yeah. But finish on the muffling thing. So it just is what it is. It depends what you're doing. it just depends what you're doing. If it's a 60s, 70s sounding thing, then that's probably what you would do. And if you use the period drums for those types of things, it all just sounds right. Live drums can be different to the studio drums, and that can go both ways. But if you imagine something like that going through a massive PA, no one's really in that setting going to be listening to like the tone of the tom and the decay and all of that. It just sort of needs to make a noise and go away. It's kind of a shame, I reckon, because it's kind of contributed to this homogenization. Where drummers used to be a lot more individual, and they weren't just individual in the way they played, they were individual in the way they sounded. They sort of took a chance to say, well, this is how I want it to sound, and this is how I hear it, and this is what I need to get to what's in my head. But of course, that's kind of a different thing to just like getting a job done as a working player. So I would just play the game with all of that, They're all just sounds, and they were used for certain types of music, and they became common practice to use muffling for certain types of music. I don't like it. I like drums to sound really big and open, just to be totally open. This bass drum has an ambassador, a single ply head on the batter side, so it's pretty big. If you're on a gig and you go into the room, because you often don't know what kind of room you might be in. And I'm sure you've been there. You go into a room and it's like all tiled. Maybe it's like a hotel lounge or some sort of corporate-y thing, and there's glass everywhere. And so there's a lot of noise already. Just the sound of people talking can easily escalate to a rabble. So having you kind of don't want to contribute any more to that noise. So yeah, I would dampen the drums, even tune the heads back and loosen them, and just make everything shorter, because it's going to sound better. What happens in those situations is you can have the rabble of the people just as they have a few drinks and more people arrive and it starts to get a bit louder. Someone sort of turns up a little bit, and then the band gets a little bit, because it gets hard to hear. Sometimes you can hardly hear because over the sound of people. So people start turning up, and it just gets to this point where it's really unpleasant for everyone, because you can tell that the people are just fighting with the sound of the band, and the whole place is just yeah. So that's where, like, if you know ahead of time, you can take something appropriate for that gig. Otherwise, you can just chuck wallets on and detune toms so they just go boop boop and don't make too much noise. I always would have tape in my bag so I could easily tape up a cymbal or something like that. like the kit that I ended up using is a 16-inch bass drum. It's a little Sonor, you've seen it on this channel. That ended up becoming my out kit, like the one that's just packed up all the time. And I'd use it pretty much for everything. And that's a 16-inch bass drum with a 10-inch small tom and a 14-inch floor tom on legs. With a sparkly finish that looks cute. But it's a poplar shell. It's just a cheap poplar shell. But the thing about poplar is some people just go, oh, that's cheap wood, so that makes it bad. Well, drums have been made out of poplar for a long time. It's an easy wood to work with. It's a soft wood. And so that little drum kit, because it's like a soft poplar wood, it's not very loud. Remember before I was talking about the maple and the birch? Well, the poplar would probably be, if you had to, rate those as far as volume goes, you would say that the birch would be the loudest and the maple would be in the middle and the poplar would probably be the quietest. And in the age of like microphones, well, if it needs to be louder, then it can just be mic'd up. And the reason I started just using that, I'll just use this. Even though with the 16-inch bass drum, and I could always put handlebars on it and have two toms if I wanted to. But I got a lot of positive feedback about the bass drum from sound guys because it's just easy. Like it just goes boo. And I could easily tune it. I can crank it up and have nothing in it and make it like a bebop, old school bebop kind of drum. It sounds great. Or I can tune it down and actually get a bass note out of it with unstuffed, or I can stuff it. So they could put a microphone on it, and if it lacked a bit of bottom end or something because it's a little drum, well, they can just put that in there. And that little bass drum could sound like a cannon. And the other thing too with like the working gigging thing is it gives people a bit of assurance or something, a bit of peace of mind or something, I think, sometimes. When you turn up with like a little setup, you don't have heaps of gear. And that little bass drum used to be a little talking point, So it worked for me really favourably. Not to mention the fact that it's a 16-inch drum. Those like backpacks, like a proper hiking backpack that has the clip on it and, set up for proper hiking, like a traveller's backpack. I started using one of those because like I've got a traps case on wheels and I've got a hard cymbal case and a soft cymbal case and that stuff and bags. But I'd figured out a way that I could break down my stands and my stool top, my pedal, everything could fit into this traveller's backpack. So now I just had a backpack as my traps case, a cymbal bag. I would have a snare drum in a case purely because the case has an arm strap. So I've got all my stands, I've got my cymbals on this arm, I've got my snare drum in a case on this arm, and I've got my tom. If I want a 4-piece, and I've got my bass drum, my floor tom, and my small tom. So one trip from the car, and I've got everything. And I got it down to that by using the backpack and one trip. chuck it all down, get set up, fast to set up, and as we just said about that small kit, the small kit is a lot more versatile than the larger kit, because obviously the large kit can't do little things, but the little kit can do large things. And yeah, you wouldn't know. It's that thing again. And those drums aren't expensive. They're at the entry level end. It's a brand name. It's a Sonor, but they're Australian, I think, at the time, about $560 for a shell pack, brand new. So then you're not too sort of obsessed about it getting damaged. You know what I mean. Of course, you'd want to look after it, but yeah. So depending on the gig, there's another one, like if you're in a room and you got a PA going, again, that moves a lot of air and pushes a lot of stuff around. And it's a little bit like if you listen to something on little speakers and then you transfer the exact same thing onto bigger speakers and turn it up, there's more of everything. There's more bass and boof and whoosh and all that stuff. So a drum kit that sounds really fat when you're maybe sitting behind it, or maybe even if you're standing in the room with your low-tuned toms and all of that, and it sounds really fat. When you actually put it in a mix, you know, especially if you've got like guitars that are using distortion and stuff like that, you kind of get really boggy. I know it sounds good to the person playing the drums, but there's another little thing, like even say if you're in like a room, like a venue on a stage, right? Tune your toms up a bit. Tune them out of that low range where all that kind of stuff is. Like your floor tom. You can have your Canon floor tom there, sure. But just think about that. Tune it all up a bit. Same with the bass drum. And you know, I've had good feedback about that as well, because it just cuts through more easily, and you can hear out the front, it sounds better. You know, and the person doing the sound can add sort of boof and or whatever energy they want to add to it, if you know what I mean. What sounds good to you at the drums doesn't always sound good in the room. You know, and then it can change when people fill up the room as well. It does change when people fill up the room. So, you know, obviously if you're like a specialised guy who's doing a specific type of music or something, you know what you're doing, you know what to do. But think of the sound guy as well, and maybe consider that one, like your drums in that setting, if they're tuned up a bit, can just sound better. They'll cut through, they'll separate better, and I think you'll make people happier. Geez, we'll just keep going. Well, hopefully this is sort of, you know, yeah, I'm kind of talking about that, like sizes of drums and all of that, and that's the other thing, like, most of the time, general business type gigs are, for drummers, they're going to be backbeat music. And it really depends on the repertoire and how accurately people are playing it and things like that. So naturally, if it's I don't know, it's a prog rock repertoire, you're probably not going to do the gig with a kick, snare and hats. But I've done heaps of gigs with just a cymbal, a snare drum, a bass drum and hi-hats. And an add-on might be a floor tom. Because that generally covers a lot of things. But sometimes it doesn't look very good and it doesn't look right. It's like little drum kits on big stages sort of don't work. There's a funny comment made by oh, that's terrible. Anyway, about how the size of drum kits just became a thing that looked good. And no one was actually playing those. Look at AC/DC or something. Like Phil Rudd would basically just play kick, snare and hats, cymbals, and of course there's some fills in there, but you don't need this massive drum kit, but it just wouldn't look right if it was a little drum kit. So I always had two. I just got it down to the two kits where that one does all that and that one does all that. And you can just dampen, muffle it, do whatever you want to do to it for it to suit that sound. In any situation, you just apply those things as well. What's the room like? Is it really reflective and bright and live and everything else? Well, then you would go the opposite and sort of deaden everything down. And, is the room a little bit full and soft? Well, then you might tune your drums up and try and get them to cut through that a little bit more. And all this you can just do very quickly, once you're good at tuning. Even like... There's a brilliant... Here you go, I'll show you these. Like, you might wonder why they would make brushes that are different gauges. It's like, well, isn't a pair of brushes a pair of brushes? But actually, there is kind of a point where sometimes... I've got this is just a standard pair of like Vic Firths, the purple ones, they've faded, But these are really quite light and thin, like a general purpose brush. But there's situations where that basically you need something that's a bit louder, but you don't want to use sticks. And those hot rod things, they've got another name, a proper name. I hate those things. Don't use those things, please. They just sound awful. They really do. Like sometimes they can work, but they should be used for a sonic reason or a textural reason, not as a substitute for a drumstick. They sound horrible if you do that. So... let's say it's like like a jazz gig where it's quiet, but these aren't going to quite cut it. So you just get yourself, I didn't bring them over, that'd be right. They're just there. I'll just grab them. So I've got these as well, which is Vic Firth as well. But these are like a much thicker gauge. These are quite a bit thicker than those purple ones. And I have another set over there that are about in between. So that means, well, now I can play brushes, but I can get a bit of volume. And I'm not getting washed out and I'm not getting lost. But I'm not having to get too loud and I'm not having to switch to sticks. Because sometimes it's not just about volume, meaning the music just doesn't want sticks. So yeah, So these things definitely are louder, and I can just play the same. So it's no different to different sticks. And there's this, I don't know if I went on about it before, there's a wonderful Billy Cobham educational DVD, his DVD, and I forget what it's called. And he goes right into it about, he will choose, say, a maple stick over a hickory stick because for a certain tune, because it has a timbral quality about it or something about it. So you can get really nuanced and into it if you like that. I used to have this set of Regal Tip 7As, but I forget if they were like something else, like a Regal Tip 7A, whatever, because they were a bit shorter, and they're like this tiny little stick. Not a children's stick, but it was pretty small. 7A thin. And I could use those as a cheat to be able to play quietly. There's all that too, right? Like, it's exactly the same thing with cymbals. I would always have tape in my bag. So I think, did I say this before? So I could tape a cymbal if I needed to. But some guys, I think, go too far into that. You can make it way too comfortable for yourself. And what I mean is you're never actually making any adjustments. So you can make the adjustments to your instrument and the sticks you're using and make sure you've got a dry, short-sounding cymbal and all of these things, and kind of just play how you always play in that comfortable zone, and the tools are kind of doing the job for you. And I don't have any problem with that, really. I guess it's just too complicated for me, and I just kind of ended up becoming a one-stick guy, so that just means I use the same stick for everything, whether it's funk or rock or bebop or loud or quiet or whatever. And so it's me that has to actually, control the sound, and there's another thing, you can listen to a cymbal and then play it with a different drumstick, and it kind of sounds different. And these are all, of course, nuanced, but once you get into it, these are the things that are also going to contribute to like your kind of sound, if you've got an interest in kind of chasing your own taste and your own sound instead of just copying all the whoever's that are out there. This drum sound where everything's compressed and dead and fast, like I just touched on. Like, there's a reason why you tune your drums really dead, and you can tune them up so they're quite tight and then make them kind of dead, because those sounds are really fast. And then you crank some compression onto it and everything else. And that's that machine gun kind of blazing sound. But if you listen, the drums have like no tone in them. They don't say anything. It's like just this boom, 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 boom. It's all... whereas if you actually hit a drum and listen to it and go boom, it takes up quite a little piece of time. And drummers back in the old days used to mute, like hand mute. Jazz drummers and stuff, you'd have to hand mute. Looking at my notes because I'm getting sidetracked again. Sort of talked about that, now we're into that. Yeah, I mean, if you are working, if you're doing a lot of gigs, you really need to be not, I think, you kind of just want like the do everything setup. Small is always, less is always more in that case, for the most part. You know? Yeah, volume. Yeah, that's that thing again. If you've ever done those, yeah, that's a different one too. Again, have you ever done those kinds of gigs where there's someone like there eating their dinner and you're like on a snare drum with a pair of brushes, you know? You just have to do it, I guess. You just have to learn to play quietly. And like we just discussed, there's heaps of things you can do as far as the tools you use to facilitate all of that. But ultimately it's kind of it's a bit of a sound. Yeah. You see, what happened here is, well, yeah, this would happen is people go and play gigs and they think it's their like time to shine or something. You know, like your band's going to do a gig at the whatever wharf or tavern or pub, or it's a wedding or it's a this or whatever it is, and it's like, you know, the band's going to rock out. And that ended up causing some problems. Like I know here, venues started requesting electric drum kits, and that's become very common, no acoustic drum kits. And it's because of that, it's because of guys showing up with, you know, a 6-piece and a China cymbal and the whole thing, because it's their 1 gig a month or something. And I've heard these people, you know, getting shitty at the venue management for telling them to turn down or something. Just totally not respecting the fact that, well, it's someone's venue. Like, this is your band and that's someone's venue. And so you're here to kind of facilitate this thing so we all work together and people have a good time and all of that. It's not your band hour who's going to rock out. And I think part of that just comes down to, that's something like professional musicians wouldn't really do, hopefully, because they know to play to the room, which is all that really means. I don't think it's all that complicated, you know. You get the people who have all the drum collections, they're always the people that can't play. Like, working drummers aren't going to have 10 drum kits that they're forever buying stuff for and whatever. There's another one, you know. Bass drum beaters. Well, there's a square bass drum beater. Well, there's a traditional kind of round felt. You got wood, you know. You got the plastic ones with the felt on the other side, different shapes. They all make a different kind of sound. The famous drummer, the king of groove, right? J.R. Robinson. I believe he still uses his Danbar square beater. He said he'll never break a bass drum head with a square beater. That's interesting, eh? And these sound and feel really good. There's an old set of period drumsticks, 1960s. These are really light. I'm not sure what these are made out of. They're a regal tip. And they are a regal tip, something IC model, if anyone knows what that might be. Can't read it all. Something C model, and I don't think it's rock. Maybe it's a regal tip rock. Nylon tip, but they're so light, you know. But quite hard. Difference in drumsticks. Like there's certain makes of drumsticks I don't like because they're too hard. They don't have any give in them. But yeah, it doesn't need to be fetishized. Ultimately, the gear isn't going to... It's not going to make you a better player, and in some cases it can probably... it can be making it a bit too easy. But anyway, I'm probably waffling on. It's alright, it's my channel, it's a talkie, no one listens to it anyway. So, yeah, my bearing edges on my drums I cut myself. And the reason I did that is because, like most drum kits that go through a factory, all the edges get cut at the same 45. So you've got a 10-inch tom with a sharp 45 edge, and then you've got a 12-inch tom with a sharp 45 edge, and then a 14-inch tom with a sharp 45 edge. So naturally, a bigger drum is going to ring more, because they're all on the same edge. So how can the big one be the same as the little one? So what I've done, because I know this drum set so well, is I've gone in and cut my own edges, recut them, so that the 10 is still a sharp 45, that I've just slightly rounded over, just to round it over a touch. But then the 12, I've rounded over more. And then the 14, I've rounded over even more. We're not talking about a lot, but what that does is it evens out the drums. So that 14 with more of a round over edge has a shorter sound. It doesn't stay alive for as long. So it's more closely matched to that 10-inch tom now. So these three drums, this drum kit, it pretty well does a pretty good job of all resonating together. I don't have a drum, with no muffling and no nothing. I don't have a drum that goes doom and then one that goes boom. They're all pretty even. That's a huge one that'll change the sound of your drums, bearing edges. And then you start considering the heads that you're going to use. And then, of course, there's the player, which we all know. Well, I've heard this before, you've seen it, where you can get an amateur player on a $15,000 drum kit and it doesn't sound very good, and you can get a great player on a $500 drum kit and it sounds like a $15,000 drum kit. And you got to remember who you're playing for as well, which is an audience of people that really don't know any different. And I would say, fair to say that most other musicians in the band don't know anything more about drums than you might know about guitar tone and bloody humbucker pickups or whatever. I'd like to see people, whatever. I like my drums to be open, to go that way. There's plenty of examples of people who do this. Simon Phillips does it. He's an example of, who says you have to have dead drums on a recording for them to sound good? Anyway, I'm just waffling on now, aren't I? There's the dog barking at a possible. All right. I think that was it. I thought I was going to do a better job than that, but... Let me know if you're under 35 in the comments. Let me know if you've watched it up to this point. Let me know if I could add anything or what else could we go on about. I kind of take for granted sometimes that it took me a long time to learn this, that if you grow up with drums and things, you take a lot of things for granted. You just assume that everyone knows that. Same with, cymbals, like sometimes, I probably already said that. I'm going to leave it.